Hello and welcome to the Avrum Rosensweig Show.
Welcome to one of the internet's best podcasts, where we dive deep into the lives of the extraordinary and fascinating people who leave an indelible mark on our world. Join us as we explore their captivating stories, remarkable achievements, and unique perspectives that shape history and inspire generations. Get ready to embark on a journey through the lives of inspiring people unlike any other.
Hello, folks. My name is Avrum Rosensweig, and this is indeed the Avrum Rosensweig Show. I'm very happy to have you. Thank you so much for watching. I'm really grateful. If you can, go to my YouTube channel and look under the Avrum Rosensweig Show, and you can just sign up. That would be really helpful. And the numbers are really important when it comes to podcasts. And I appreciate the development of what we're trying to achieve here, and that comes much more so when more people are watching, when they sign up, when they subscribe. So what is it that we're trying to achieve here? Well, in essence, I really want to bring a positive spin to humankind. As I often say, I want to pat humankind on the back for the incredible things that we have accomplished throughout history. There seems to be this propensity in particular over the last decade or so, to be somewhat self-deprecating and to almost look down upon ourselves as a collective. And I think that's really problematic. It is because it's not the whole story. It's not as though we don't have, failures. We certainly do. War is a good example of that. But we have also done absolutely incredible things throughout history. And if we're able to focus on that, we're able to look at that, I think that in itself will build our collective consciousness and as individuals, and it'll make this world a much more peaceful place because we will be focused on those beautiful things that we have done, that we are doing currently, and that we are looking to the future to do even more so. Now, today our focus is on writing and writers. And to that ends, I have with me a very lovely fellow as a guest, Norrin Ripsman. How are you, Norrin?
Doing very well, Avrum. Thank you for having me.
No, it's wonderful to have you. Norrin is a professor in Pennsylvania. He is a professor of international studies, and he has also written 9 academic books. But on top of that, Norrin has taken time to pursue a passion of his, which is writing novels. And one novel which he has written is The Oracle. Can we see that there? And the other is Songbook. Now, I am fascinated by he doing that for many reasons. Number one is I've been trying to write a book for many years and have struggled with it. So when I meet people who have accomplished that, which is not an easy thing, we're speaking about 400 pages here, and to hold a story in your mind and be able to spell it out, I think that's magnificent. So I'm quite envious, right? And the other thing is that what he writes about is tremendous. In The Oracle, Norrin writes about a homeless man. And he writes about him in the most compassionate of manners, fleshing out this individual's character, which we will speak about, in a way which is very deep, in a way which I think is very insightful. So I'm very happy to have Norrin here today. We're sort of going on a bit of a series of writers. We'll have someone else on Sunday whom we'll speak with by the name of Brian Prowski, who's the former executive director of the Jewish Family and Child Service in Toronto. Since his retirement from JF&CS, he has written somewhere around 8 or 9 novels. The man is a machine when it comes to it. Yeah, it's unbelievable. Now, Norrin, I know that as I said, you've written 2 novels. You're actually on your 3rd right now. Is that correct?
That's right. The Songbook is the short story collection. That was the first. The Oracle at Spring Garden Road is the first novel that I've published and written, but I've actually written 2 more since that. I'm just finishing the 3rd of them right now.
I absolutely love that you are doing this. I really do. I'm not trying to be obsequious here. I am just so incredibly in awe of individuals who have the ability to do so. So let's talk about that in one moment. Some really good news here, Norrin M. Ripsman. You're going to be really excited about this. The show has gotten sponsorship.
Wonderful.
Yes, thank you.
I'm really happy to hear that.
Thank you so much. And the sponsorship is through the Professional Center. You'll see a logo above Norrin's head. Toronto's premier co-working space at 120 Adelaide, where more is the standard. The industry leader since 1987. TPC offers private and team offices, fully equipped meeting rooms, collaborative workspaces, premium amenities, and exceptional hospitality. Book a day a week, however long you need. Escape work from home distractions and discover more privacy, more productivity, and more community at TPC. For more information, visit theprofessionalcenter.com, which you can see at the bottom of my screen. Essentially, what these guys do is they have this huge amount of office space at 120 Adelaide, and you can lease out or rent out from them parcels of it. And by the same token, you can use the resources that they have available. In other words, they have administrative assistants. They have machinery there that you can use in order to, do your business, whatever it happens to be. So give them a shot. Be in touch with them, the Professional Center, and by doing so, you help the show a lot. Now, Norrin Ripsman, when he isn't writing fiction, as we said, he's a professor of international relations, and he is the world's worst saxophonist. Born in Montreal, Canada, he has made his home in 11 cities in 6 countries on 3 continents. He now lives in the United States, where he teaches at Lehigh University in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. In addition to 9 scholarly works in international relations, he has published works of literary fiction, including a short story collection, Songbook, and a novel, The Oracle of a Spring Garden Road, as we mentioned. And he's currently in the process of writing 2 more novels. So once again, Norrin, welcome to the show. We had a wonderful coffee together on Friday. And that for me was a real pleasure, because I don't often do pre-interviews like that because of time constraints. But we went to Starbucks across the street from here, Shepherd and Bathurst. And it was just a pleasure to talk to you, because I find that you are a very eclectic individual. You know the city Toronto backwards and forwards. In fact, it's reflected in your novel, The Oracle, and you bought my coffee. So,
Avrum, as I told you when you left, it was a wonderful experience for me, because even though I had just met you for coffee for the first time, it felt like I'd known you all my life, and it was just really enjoyable to talk to you for 2.5 hours. So I appreciate the opportunity.
what was that feeling of sensing that you had known me all your life? What is that?
There are a few people in my life who I see infrequently, but whenever I see them, there's just this connection, this symbiosis that it's almost like we're continuing the conversation, without a break. I have a friend of mine from Toronto, Isaac Becker. He's now Itzik Becker, who I see in Israel. He made Aliyah many years ago. He's in Beit Shemesh. And whenever I see him after like a 2-3 year hiatus, it's like we just connect easily and can talk very easily. That's kind of what I felt when we sat down together. It was just really easy to talk to you. You seem to have knowledge and interest in a lot of the same things that I do, and it just really worked very comfortably.
Would you say that in your life you have a soulmate, your wife Natalie, that you have a soulmate in terms of maybe even colleagues, but that some of your friends are a particular type of soulmate?
I don't know that there's a particular formula for that individual. Like I don't know if I could say exactly what would lead to that connection, but yeah, with my wife, I have a soulmate. Absolutely. I mean, it's nice that, we just feel seamlessly comfortable talking about anything and at ease with each other. So I would say definitely my wife is a soulmate. There are also, as I say, a few people who I just connect with. And there are other people who maybe not. I mean, writing is a very introspective endeavor. And so I'm much more introspective in nature. And so, it's nice when I connect with people.
Do you like a good party, however?
I do too, but maybe I like that a lot more when I was younger.
No, I guess what I'm really asking is, people have the sense that introspective people are individuals who stay home all the time. They're constantly rejigging, but that's not the truth.
No.
How would you
No,
define
I'll go
your?
to a party. When I was younger, when I was in undergraduate U of T, or when I was doing my doctorate at the University of Pennsylvania, I was even, I think, the life of the party at times.
Were you?
And I don't think that's where I am now, although, I'm not antisocial or anything.
And so, for instance, do you go to synagogue on Shabbat?
I do.
And do you have your synagogue friends?
I do.
Yeah. Explain what that is, because it's a very unique relationship. Do you see them during the week?
Most of them not. I'll see them once a week. They have their work. I have my work. Sometimes we'll get together on Saturday night or a Sunday, but typically it's a very nice, comfortable environment where you have it's sort of like a Cheers environment where you have your regular friends who you sit down and talk to. There's probably limited range of subjects that we talk about, but it's nice. It's a very pleasant feeling. It's very comfortable. It's like a bar without the alcohol, except during the Kiddush.
And there might be a lot of it there, actually.
Well,
I have a friend, Bert Surfat. He's a very dear friend of mine. We've been friends for 50 years. And he goes to a synagogue here in Toronto. It's a Sephardic synagogue, Petach Tikva. You're probably familiar with it.
Sure.
It's in the hood here.
That's right.
And whenever I get together with him, we do frequently on Friday nights for dinner with his daughter, Leah, his friends from shul come up quite a bit. And he has known them for many, many, many years. The interesting thing about him is that they are specifically on Shabbat and on the holidays. And if he goes during the week to put on tefillin in the morning. But they're very unique friends insofar as they have known him since he was a little guy. They have certain insights to him that they'll really only see at those times. I don't think they know him as well as I do, but he loves them dearly and he considers them very, very close friends.
I think that's a fair statement. It's different for me because I've moved around so much. So I was born in Montreal. I grew up in Toronto, and since then I've moved for the PhD and for postdocs and for teaching opportunities and positions. And so I've lived, and for sabbaticals and research travel and the like. And so I've really lived many different places. And so in Philadelphia now, where I live, suburban Philadelphia, I've only been here for 8 years. It's a different experience because there aren't people who've known me since I was very young. And so you just come in, I came in my mid to late 40s and don't have people who've known me all my life here. For that, I have to go back to Montreal or Toronto.
So do you have friends in Philly?
I do have friends in Philly, of course. But it's just not that they're not friends who've known me, for more than about 8 years.
Yeah, I've heard that from many people. A buddy of mine, Yudi, lives in New York. He's been there for 25 years. And he said that the depth of his friendships are not anywhere as close to the ones that he grew up with, me and other guys.
It's moving around. This is one difference between the United States and Canada that we find is that in the United States, no one is from here because everyone goes away for college and then they get married, they get their jobs. And so families don't really stay as close together as they are in Canada, where people tend to go to undergraduate at home, tend to live at home, frankly, and commute like I did. I lived at home and I commuted downtown to the University of Toronto during my bachelor's and my master's there. And I think, I look at my family in Toronto and we're the outlier because everyone else lives, frankly, in a short distance from each other in Thornhill. And we're the ones that are here. It's the same in my wife's family. My wife is Parisienne, so all her family lives in Paris, and we're the outliers. So I think that our experience, therefore, is more American, in fact, because most of the people around us aren't from Philly. Very few people actually grew up here. They've moved at various times.
Norrin, tell me some of the most important places that you've lived, the memorable ones.
Every place was memorable. Montreal, Toronto, where I came from, where I grew up. I went back to both places. I moved to Montreal for my first job. Spent 16 years there at Concordia University, and Philadelphia it's my second coming to Philadelphia because I did my doctorate at the University of Pennsylvania. And I'm back here. I don't teach in Philadelphia. I teach in Bethlehem, which is an hour and 5-minute drive or so north of Philadelphia. But this is where this is a community we wanted to be in. I've lived in London and Paris for short stints while I was doing dissertation research. So we're there for a number of months each place. Paris I know well. My in-laws are there. London I know well because we have family there as well through my step-grandmother. We've been in Melbourne, Australia for a sabbatical, and that was one of the most wonderful experiences. The community there is absolutely incredible. Spent a year in Tel Aviv. I did a postdoc there. I was at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, and my wife was at Tel Aviv University, so we lived in Tel Aviv at the time. That was a wonderful year. Lived in Chicago, in Boston, in Columbus, Ohio. We've lived a lot of. We've done a lot of geography, and then because I'm an international relations professor, I travel very widely and spend time, interviewing. I guess like yourself, but I interview politicians and diplomats as necessary for my work. So I've really covered a lot of miles, if you will, on an airplane.
Can one be a professor of international relationships and not leave home?
Yes, but not my kind of international relations professor, in that there is a very popular trend now to focus on quantitative analysis and number crunching, to focus on things such as experiments, online experiments, and formal modeling. All of those things can be done, and sometimes I meet people who, in my field, who really don't do very much travel, and I think that loses a lot of the context. I am a contextual researcher, a qualitative researcher, rather than a quantitative researcher, and I think you can't understand the phenomena that you're exploring, the context of the governmental decisions that you're investigating, if you don't actually go ahead and immerse yourself in the language frequently, and certainly government documents, in actually talking to the people involved when you're dealing with more recent cases. So my short answer, that's the long answer. The short answer is I don't think you could be a very good one if you don't actually travel.
So when you and I speak about the world, of which we did over our coffee, is the imagery in your head a patchwork of remembering Australia and the lay of the land and the culture and the people, and then jumping over to Paris, jumping over to London, et cetera, et cetera? Do you see the world as a whole planet versus individuals who might just see it in the city that they live?
Geography is very important to me. I think if you read, as you have, if you read The Oracle of Spring Garden Road, or if you read Songbook, all of the stories have a strong sense of setting. And in fact, I wrote about places that I knew well. I also, for Halifax and Fredericton, I lived in Halifax for a year, another place I lived for a year, which I really enjoyed. When I was teaching at Dalhousie, or Fredericton, which I didn't live in, but I traveled back and forth, to back west, back home, to visit family through Fredericton numerous times. There, I had an idea of where the stories were being set, and I did additional research trips to photograph to make certain I understood, where my character was sleeping, where my character lived, how long it took to go to work when he went to work in Fredericton, that type of thing. Where events were set. So in general, geography is very important for the way I see the world. In international politics too, it's helpful to understand the nature of the territorial conflicts when there are. It's helpful for me to understand who's making decisions in what kind of environment, how hot and how humid it is. whether they drink lots and lots of cafe Americano, or whether they're drinking espressos, or these are things that I think give you some context. It's not like any of my international relations work focuses on the coffees they drink, but that kind of context is important to me. And when I do think about the world and think about problems that I've studied, or conflicts that I've studied, or interactions that I've studied, I usually do think about the lay of the landscape as well.
I want to dive into your novels, but before we do that, I've always been curious about the first day teaching or lecturing at a new university. Do you remember what it was like the first day at Dalhousie when you were standing in front of your students?
No, I don't remember specifically what it was like. I can tell you that I always get a rush from teaching, and from the first day in particular, because it's a thrill to teach. I mean, it's something that I've always enjoyed. People have asked me at times whether I'd be interested in, like many academics, in being simply a researcher rather than a professor.
Right.
My answer is no. I love my research, but if I got out of the classroom, I would feel like I'm cheating myself. There's something about that connection that you established, and you can see it in their eyes when they're coming in. They're not certain what to expect from you on that first day. And usually, well, I'll entertain them with a couple of stories. I'll joke around a little bit, and I see them getting at ease and wondering, okay, well, is this guy for real? What's up? And establishing that connection as I go forward. So the first day's pretty important to me. It's also important to me as we get towards the last day, because you can see who you've made a difference with. Mm-hmm. And who is going to take what you've given them and really build on it and do something wonderful. And that's just an incredible feeling too.
Do they call you professor?
They do.
Yeah. Does anyone call you Norrin of your students?
I don't. I ask them not to. I think it's important for there to be a barrier of professionalism, because in the end, I'm grading them and I'm not their friend. So I often feel very close to my students, and my students will often feel very close to me, but I don't think it's appropriate for the undergraduates. Graduate students are a different story, and yes, I've had graduate students call me Norrin. The institution I currently teach in doesn't have a graduate program in international relations, so no, they all call me Professor Ripsman.
Again, your whole field and what you do, it's for me, it's very, very compelling, because I've had my share of professors. Some of them are phenomenal and some of them are just awful, right? And you're right. The first day of school is what you said before, is this guy for real? That's a very true statement. In other words, is he a good teacher? Does he know his stuff? Can he relate to me? When you're teaching, Norrin, and you're in the zone, do you see the students? Do you see them looking back at you, or are you in your own place?
I can't be. I talk to them. I make adjustments on the fly when I see their eyes. If I see that they're looking down, they're looking away, then I'm doing something wrong and I need to find a way to connect to them. So no, I'm always looking for reactions. I feed off the reactions. In a sense, it's an acting job in some respects, in that you feed off your audience. And I think that's the high of teaching, when you feel you're connecting to them and they're interested in what you're saying. And yeah, that's critical. So no, I've had professors of mine, I've had great professors, but I've also had one or two professors who never did look at us and who just talked to the wall or talked elsewhere, the floor. And I don't think that's very effective. As I tell my students, teaching, talking, writing, all of these things are communication, and it's about getting ideas from your head into someone else's head. And if you're not focused on your audience and you're not constantly asking, what is my audience getting out of this, then you're not going to be able to connect to them, and you're not going to communicate. You're going to be speaking or writing, but you're not going to be communicating ideas from you to them.
How difficult is fairness as a professor? Let's say a student goes eye to eye with you, toe to toe with you. If you're teaching, let's say, something about Israel, of which I know you do, and their sense of Israel is dramatically different than yours, or how you're teaching it. do professors, or let's say in your case, do you look at that student and for a moment at least change your thinking about them? Do you force yourself? Do you say to yourself, okay, Norrin, this is supposed to be an open forum, and I want to teach, and I want challenges, and if those challenges come my way, I'm going to do my very best to be fair with that student? How does that work?
I mean, I will tell you, fairness is one of my most important commitments to my students, and I make
Yeah.
this very clear to them. There are a couple of things. One is, to begin with, when I teach, I try not to indoctrinate. I know a lot of people do that in the university, and I think that's part of the downfall of the university system in education right now, is that many people are using the classroom as a forum to indoctrinate. I tell my students up front that several things. First of all, in a first or second year class where they don't have enough information to be able to challenge me, my goal is to wear different hats. And I tell them that when I teach, like, for example, international relations theory, liberal theory, realist theory, constructivist theory, Marxist theory, I tell them, okay, today we're dealing with Marxism. I'm going to wear my Marxist hat. I'm going to try and present this as faithfully as a Marxist international relations scholar would. And I'm going to answer questions that you ask as if I were a Marxist international relations scholar. It doesn't matter whether I agree with it or not, for any perspective. When I deal with conflicts, I tell them that I will present the different points of view as effectively as possible, and how a diplomat from that country, that entity would actually represent their views. Because my goal is not to make them think like I think, it's to open their minds and make them think. So that's the first thing. And I tell them I do assign my own work. I've published a lot in the area of politics of peacemaking, or the political economy of security, also in international relations theory, work that I did with very close collaborators, Stephen Lobel and Jeff Taliaferro, have really carved out an alternate approach to international relations called neoclassical realism. And I do assign my stuff, but I tell my students that first, they shouldn't feel that on exams or essays, they ought to parrot what I'm saying. I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in them thinking, treating my work like everyone else's, and evaluating it intelligently. If they evaluate someone else's work not intelligently, and they dismiss it not intelligently, or they parrot it not intelligently, they're going to get a poor grade. Well, that'll be the same with mine. On the other hand, if they criticize my work intelligently, they engage it and criticize it intelligently, or they actually agree with it intelligently, that will put them in better stead. So I make very clear that I don't reward students for thinking like I do. I reward them for thinking clearly and presenting clear arguments. I do tell them that in the third and the fourth year, and then at the graduate level, I do present my own views more often. I do tell them when they're my views, and I tell them that just because I say something doesn't mean it's right. And therefore, they should feel free to challenge me. I will, however, stand my ground at that point, but because I think they can handle it at that point, they have enough of a basis to do so. But I do not punish students for thinking differently from me. In fact, I often give them more credit for having the guts to do so, if they do it intelligently. The other thing that I do is I grade blindly, something I decided on early in my career. So I tell students for papers and for exams to use their student number, but not to put their name anywhere on the paper, so that I grade without knowing whose papers I'm grading. And only after, when I have all of them graded and I've done, if I feel there's a need for an adjustment because of only after I've done that do I match that to the student records. And so, no, students can disagree with me. I hope they can disagree with me freely. I've had students tell me they've appreciated that in the past. I hope that most students feel that they can come into my class and get a fair treatment of their ability, their ideas and their thinking ability, rather than their ideologies or their points of view. I've also had many students who I think have changed their minds about various different things after they've come out of my classes, because they've been confronted by a variety of different perspectives in a fair manner, rather than in a in an unfair manner, rather than setting up straw men and knocking them down. And I do think that students often will change their mind. Not all of them, not all the time, not even most of them, but some of them will change their minds as a result of encountering ideas in my class. So that's how I deal with fairness, which I think is very important from a teaching point of view.
Norrin, what's it like when you discover an intellectual superstar?
It is wonderful. It's a great experience to see someone who gets it, to see someone who I think is ahead of where I was. And I've had instances like that as well, where I've had students who are just incredibly wonderful, and it's a joy.
What do you mean that they're ahead of you? What does that mean?
I mean that they understood things ahead of where I was, and more deeply ahead of where I was at the same stage. And to me, that's just wonderful to see. If I get them to understand, the limits of methodology, for example, they understand methodological sophistication as a junior or a senior, third or fourth year student. If I get them to understand, how to go about finding what they need to find out, but also not to how to overreach or to ram that square peg into a round hole, which I think is something I started learning as a master's student, maybe as early PhD student. Occasionally I'll have a student who gets that much earlier, and that's really impressive. And then who marries that with an incredible writing ability. That's just all, plus the ability to speak and present. That's the whole package. And so I think, yeah.
Do you have students over the years like who would come to you regularly and sit with you like a chavruta, like an intellectual soulmate, as we spoke about before, and talk to you on a regular basis, developing their thinking, developing their minds? Does this actually exist in the university world?
I have people, we have regular office hours, and then we have, and most people don't use regular office hours because they just don't. They decide they don't need it. I actually, for my senior classes, require them to come in at various times of the paper writing process so that I could do just that and talk them through the process of selecting their questions, selecting their cases, the methodology, and the beginnings of their case study. And a lot of students don't like the fact that I require them to do that, but I think it's very helpful. I have some students who come into office hours on a regular basis, and that's often not helpful either, because they come in just to put in FaceTime more or less, and they don't really have a reason to do that. But I've had a few students over the years who've come in regularly just to, because they're really curious and they're really interested and they're pushing and they want to. I've had those students. That's the more the chavruta experience, I think.
Have you had students over for dinner?
No.
Does Natalie, your wife, know any of your students?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
I don't teach in my city, and even when I did, my wife and I have never been in the same city. She's a professor of computer science, and we've never actually both taught in the same city, and usually one of us is commuting. So our home life is kind of, a patchwork of adaptation. And so we've never been able to have that kind of environment.
Okay. No. I think I'm projecting here because my father was a rabbi and he had many students, and we would often have people over. But I can understand you're an hour away from your university at this point in time, right?
That's right.
Norrin, as I said before, you've written 2 books. One of them is called the Songbook. The other is The Oracle of Spring Garden Road. The Songbook is about a dozen short stories of which you've written over time. And you dedicated the book, you said, to my father, Michael Ripsman, who always wanted to write but never found the time. Were you being kind? Because I often say that too, that I never find the time to write, but honestly, it's not true. It's just I get these blocks in my head. Could your father have written?
That's a difficult question. I know that he told me he always wanted to write. His interest was in science fiction or satire, more satire than science fiction. He thought The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy was the greatest book, and he would have loved to have written it. And he always told me, he had some ideas. He wanted to write. And when he was diagnosed with kidney cancer in 2019 in the fall, I went in for the first 2 treatments before COVID shut the border down. And he was really bored at that point. He told me, I'm just so bored. And I said, because he was told that he couldn't interact with people very much because he had a compromised immune system. And at that point, I asked him, why don't you write now? You always wanted to. And he said it was too late. It's just far too late because he didn't have the ideas coming. He didn't have the ability to sit in the position you needed to sit in. He didn't have the ability to keep ideas in his head. And he said it was just too late. And it really it broke my heart. I don't know, to answer the question you're asking. I don't know whether it's true that he that he didn't have time and it wasn't an excuse. I can say that he worked very hard all his life, and he used to come home tired. He'd come home not at 5 o'clock. He'd come home later, 7, 8 o'clock, and he was always exhausted. He was a pharmacist, standing on his feet all day, working many hours, many days, and it was very. I think he would have had a hard time doing it earlier. So I'm not sure that it was an excuse. I think it's just life has a habit of getting in the way of things, and sometimes it's nice to take life by the hands and say, you're not going to get in the way of things.
What sort of dad was he?
Wonderful. I owe a lot to him. He was extremely intelligent and fostered intellectual pursuit. He taught me a lot about being open-minded, about being intellectually curious, taught me a lot of my bedrock core values. And he was also soft and gentle, like very, very gentle, both with me and my kids. He had a soft, like a very easy to trust voice, like a very, very calm voice. When my kids were upset, he would just take them and walk them to show them Zadie's bus, and they would just calm down immediately. He had that ability of just projecting gentleness and calm and trust.
Well, what did he see of your successes?
Oh, he really appreciated all of the books that I published. Sometimes he said, he didn't really follow them. It wasn't his field. He was more in the scientific field. But he really took great joy in all of them. As far as the fiction writing, I know he would have loved it. I read him my first short story while he was in the hospital, and I don't know that he really got very much out of it, because at that point his attention span was flagging. He liked the idea. He was very favorable to the idea that I was writing and told me how much he enjoyed it. I'm not sure that was really true at the time, because I don't know. I don't know whether he was capable of sitting through the whole story and concentrating on it. But I think he liked the fact that I wrote. I think he would have appreciated, the books. I think he would have appreciated the books not only for the geography, which he would be familiar with from a lot of his life, but I think he also valued fiction. I mean, he introduced me to some of the people who were giants in my mind, people like Graham Greene, who absolutely wonderful. He introduced me to John le Carré, who has this attention to the silences between the notes that I really enjoy as well. Yeah, and so I think he would have absolutely been pleased with these books, I believe.
My father died in 1989 at 61 years old, so he wasn't around for my successes. And I often wondered, what is a father's response? It's kind of a brushstroke question, but what was your father's response when he was at your graduation, let's say, or the book came out and you were, speaking about it at a local bookstore? Would he come over to you? Would he hug you? Would he whisper in your ear, "Son, I'm just so proud of you"? What was that process like?
Yeah, I can't remember exactly what it was. I know that I felt the support and I felt the love that came out. Probably hugged me. He probably told me he was proud of me. I know. I can tell you more recently when I came to Lehigh, because I was offered a research chair, the Monroe J. Rathbone Distinguished Professor of International Relations, and he was very proud of that. And he told me,
he?
Yeah, he was very proud of that.
Did that mean a lot to you? His pride?
Oh, absolutely.
It did.
Absolutely.
Because why?
Because he was monumental in my life. I mean, he was someone, I guess I idolized him. As you know, it's not like he was a perfect human being, but I don't know perfect human beings.
Yes.
But he was a good-hearted human being, and he loved me, and he supported what I did. And having him see that, I mean, I'll tell you something else too. Having him see something that meant that he could understand, that meant something to him. He didn't really understand a lot of the academic world, even though he had actually taught at times at I think at Université de Montréal in using computers and technology for pharmaceuticals in pharmacy school. And but he didn't really understand the nature of the academic world. So I remember when I published my first book, and he had this vision that my first book would be sold in his pharmacy, that he'd have a little display there, and I explained that it wasn't quite. We were walking to Schull at that point, and he was asking me about it, and I said, well, it's not quite that kind of book. You're not going to have that many readers. And he says, okay, and he was chewing on it, and he says, so, well, is it going to be something that you'll find in Kohl's? And I said, no, you're not going to find this in Kohl's either. You may find this in specialized university bookstores and libraries. And at some point he stopped and he said, so how many books are you going to sell? And I said, well, a colleague of mine former professor of mine who I respected said that, his first book was very successful and sold 900 copies.
Yeah.
My father's face fell at that point. So, and another time, he couldn't understand what a postdoc was. I was doing not a postdoc, but I was doing a sabbatical year as a visiting fellow at Harvard at the John F. Kennedy School, and he didn't understand what I was doing. So he said, "So they're paying you your salary?" And I said, "No, they're not paying my salary. They're contributing a portion, but they have the what's it called? They're giving me an office and an affiliation. But why are they doing that? What are you doing for the year? Are you teaching for them?" And I said, "No, I'm not teaching." So why do they have you? And I said, "Well, I'm writing a book right now. Actually, I was working on 3 books at the time, but I'm writing books at the time." And he said, "So why do they care? Did they get money from your book?" And I said, "No, they don't." And I had to try and explain to him that this is what universities do. I interact with their students and their faculty, and that creates, contributes to the academic environment. Of course, we will take their visiting scholars, and when they come to our university, and it creates intellectual cross-pollination. But that was hard for him to connect to. He was very proud that I was at Harvard, but he was uncertain about what exactly that meant and why. And I think he would really have. So I think he really connected to the research chair. He understood exactly what that meant, and he knew that meant that it was a big positive. It was an honor, and it had other benefits that came with it as well.
What's your mom Tova like? She's still with us. Michael has
She
passed
is.
away.
She's kind of the anchor of the family. She's she keeps everybody together. She's kind of our voice of tradition as well. More so, I think, than my father was. She's the voice of tradition, and it really connects to. It brings us all together. Connects to our kids as well.
Does she appreciate your novels?
Absolutely. Much more so, I think, than the academic books that I've published. I think the academic books that I published in international relations weren't quite her thing, not quite what she reads. But when I published these 2 books, she read them both, and she was just really excited, and she's been telling everybody about it. And it's something that she really values, and she's my #1 booster as far as that goes. And so I'm very grateful to her for that. That she's just been, she got it, she understood, she connected to it. She really, I think she was moved by the books, and she's just a wonderful supporter.
Now we're about 44 minutes into this interview, and we haven't really talked about your novels. And the reason we haven't is because I have a tremendous fascination with humankind with my guests. And to me, it's really important to understand where you came from, to recognize where you're at today. Now, you are an author, and that is a very beautiful, special thing. One of the books that you've written is called The Oracle of Spring Garden Road. I'd just like to read a little bit of a blurb about it and then break it down a little bit, understand what you're trying to accomplish here. Crazy Eddie is a homeless man who inhabits 2 squares of pavement in front of a bank in downtown Halifax, and that's in Nova Scotia. In this makeshift office, he panhandles and dispenses his peerless wisdom. He's well-educated, fiercely intelligent, with a passionate interest in philosophy and a profound love of nature. Eddie is an enigma for the locals. Who is he? Where did he come from? What brought him to life on the streets? Rumors abound. None capture the unique worldview and singular character that led him to withdraw from the perfidy and corruption of human beings. Just as Eddie had decided to plan his return to society after nearly 2 decades on the street, he encounters Jane, a kind woman whose intelligence and integrity rivals his own. Jane makes it her mission to uncover the painful secret of his past, to make him whole again. But will she heal Eddie, or will he save her? Now, this is a 400-page book. It's available, by the way, at all the popular bookstores, Amazon as well. And it really focuses on a character by the name of Gabriel. However, he goes by the name of Eddie on the street. The obvious question is, you spent an awful long time writing about a highly significant character in your mind, and he happens to be brilliant, and he happens to be homeless most of the book, or a lot of the book. What brought you to such a character? Why is it you dedicated so much of your life to Eddie?
It started with an idea that most of my writing starts with an idea or an image. I had this idea of a homeless, observant Jew in the most unlikely of places. And that became, in little time, that became downtown Halifax. And I was, bothered by this idea of how would that have happened? Why would that have happened? And as time came in, I found him compelling. I found that question compelling to begin with, because homeless people are a bit of an enigma in general, because and of course I don't need to explain this to you of all people, but they're an enigma because most of the time to us they're invisible in plain sight, and we don't give them a second look. We pass by them. Often we try very hard, as many people do, to Gabriel or to Eddie. We cross the street to avoid them, or we pretend we're looking the other way, and we don't recognize the humanity in them, and don't recognize the fact that they're compelling stories in them, and that actually bear a second look. And so when I had this idea, it kind of haunted me. Well, who is this? Why is he there? What is his story that we're ignoring and that we're passing by? And so that's how this idea started. And as I started, fleshing out this idea of who Eddie was, or who in this case Gabriel was, and understood his character, understood his backstory, understood he's a child of immigrants who's, you don't want to get into too much, but he grew up in a neighborhood not unlike the neighborhood that I grew up in, or that you grew up in North York, in Downsview. All of these, as he became real, suddenly, as with most of my characters, 2 things happened. First, I started occupying his head, and he started occupying my head. And so I began to care about him quite a great deal, and began to look at the world through his eyes. And it was very easy for me then, once he becomes part of me, or part of my head, it becomes very easy for me to write 400 pages about him, to be able to understand that he matters more than one might at first blush.
Did your relationship to the homeless change as you wrote?
I'd say in a way, yes, it did, in that I looked as I was writing and still do today, look at homeless people and I wonder, what is their story? Why are they here? Are they, some of the unique aspects of Eddie or Gabriel were that he didn't drink, he didn't do drugs. That something, so I wonder when I pass people, okay, if I do give them some money, are they going to, I prefer giving food actually. I don't like giving money as much as giving a sandwich or something. But if I do give money, is it going to go to drugs? Is it going to go to alcohol? Or is there someone that might actually be helped here, that might actually, appreciate the human connection, like Eddie did in his way, sort of, because he was also a little bit superior about human connection and a little bit condescending at times too.
Yes, he was.
Yeah.
By the way, interesting fact, the National Survey on Drug Use and Health found that 74% of homeless people are not drug addicts.
Interesting.
Yet this information was presented to the public in somewhat of a misleading way. And when it was, people often dismiss it. You mentioned before that I have a sense of the homeless because I worked with the homeless for about 20 years through my organization via HAFTA. And you're right. The fundamental thing, the bottom line is they feel invisible, and we who walk by them often do as much as we can to not see them. Yeah. Did Eddie or Gabriel, both names, he used both names. Was there anything inside of you that you related to in a very significant manner in terms of his homelessness? Do you ever feel lost? Do you ever feel invisible?
No, not until I inhabited his skin. When you write fiction, your characters are fictional. They're made up or invented. They're imaginary, but they're part of your imaginary and your imagination. And they do somehow, you do ground them in your past and your experience. And so all of my characters, I suppose, have some connection to me. And I do have significant connections to Gabriel in that I've lived, in the types of places that he's lived. He has connections to spots like Earl Bales Park, which we talked about, but which I have deep connections to. He, deep connection to the University of Toronto, where I did 2 degrees, and had, I just loved my time there. He also, he's very philosophical and loved philosophy. He wanted to do a PhD in philosophy. Okay, I didn't do it in philosophy, although I really enjoyed political philosophy myself. So we have certain things in common, but then there are many ways where he and I diverge, and it just, more ways than I think we converge. So yeah, there's some of me in him, but there's a lot of him that's very different from me.
It's very interesting because indeed he was a religious Jew, and when he was younger, he was very, very strict about the rules that he created within his world, within his thinking, and he didn't allow people a lot of leeway. And because of that, Gabriel had a very contentious relationship, at least for the first quarter, half of the book, with his parents. That did eventually change. But what I find compelling is that's not you at all.
No.
So to be a fictional writer, one has to really investigate things that they know nothing about.
You have to, some of it is research. There's a lot that I had to research in the book to make sure that I was being fair, accurate, convincing. Yeah. Things like how to repair violins. I had to learn a little bit about repairing violins, repairing saxophones, repairing other instruments. But more than that, I did interviews. I interviewed a couple of homeless people on the streets of Halifax to get a sense of what their life was.
How was that?
They weren't.
How was that? What was that like?
It was awkward at times, and I had to go beyond my discomfort because I didn't want to feel like I was exploiting them, and I compensated them for their time as well. But I asked them some very personal questions, and I felt very uncomfortable doing that. Now I interview professionally. I interview people who make political decisions and who are involved in diplomacy. This was a very different kind of interviewing, and I felt a little voyeuristic at the time, and I was a little uncomfortable about that, but I felt it was necessary. Asking them about, how often do they use the shelter? How do they sleep? Are there times when they'd rather not sleep in the street when they do, and things of that nature? And a couple of people didn't want to talk to me, but a couple of them did talk to me. And so, yeah, there are ways to find out about what you don't experience yourself. And then there's simply the imagination. From my kids from a very young age loved my stories because I never told them the same story twice. Even when I told them fairy tales, I would twist them every single time. And so we would have different endings, different features, just for the fun of it. But then I often told them like my own made up stories on the spot, and they absolutely loved it. I created my own kids characters. And one day, both my daughters want me to publish my children's stories at some point. And at some point, I promised them that I will. I have other things that I need to do first, but at some point I'll go back to children's stories at different ages, just because they want me to do that.
So you have a tremendous imagination then.
I have an imagination, let's put it that way. I definitely you live in the imaginary at times.
Does that work as a professor?
Sometimes it's helpful if I'm trying to explain the past and understand the past. Sometimes it's helpful for me to ask myself, why are characters doing this? Why are our political leaders inconsistent at times? Why are they taking a position that seems to be at odds with the evidence? And so sometimes I try to imagine the same way I do when I'm writing fiction. I'll try to imagine, well, what could have brought them to that? What could they be thinking? What might they know that I don't know, etc. Doesn't mean that I'm right. But it allows me to investigate things that I might not, hypotheses that I might not have known to investigate otherwise. I'll give you an example of this. I think I mentioned to you when we had coffee that one of the things that I've done with a colleague of mine, Jack Levy at Rutgers, is we've looked at appeasement in the 1930s. And we have I've gone through, I spent a few years going through Chamberlain's papers, Delatier's papers, Churchill's papers, Eden's papers, all of the government, cabinet meeting minutes and memoranda, the Joint Intelligence Committee's papers on appeasement. And what we've concluded is that the traditional story about Chamberlain, hang on, I should plug in to make sure I don't run out of charge. But what I found is that the traditional story that about appeasement is not accurate. And one thing that happened is that Chamberlain died, and Churchill was able to scapegoat him and make him appear rather foolish in retrospect. And now, again, it's not the full story. I also think that Churchill was very unreasonable, and it's a good thing that he was, because he did some rather foolish things a priori, which turned out to, by dumb luck, be the correct things to do. But so it's not a story of Chamberlain was great and Churchill wasn't. We would have been better off with Chamberlain. But one thing that occurred to me is that there was a lot of inconsistency in Chamberlain's behavior. And one thing I saw when my father-in-law was diagnosed with cancer, he behaved more erratically, was more irritable, was more unpredictable. And the doctor, when he passed away, the doctor said, now we probably noticed that he was more erratic for the last 10 years, even before he was diagnosed. And we did. And it occurred to me to start, so I was wondering about it, and I was thinking, gee, what could explain some of these inconsistencies in the same letter that he's writing to his sister, where he seems very sanguine about about Germany at times, thinking that Germany is not likely to upset the apple cart. But at the beginning and the end of the letter, he seems to be very despondent. So how this inconsistency. And so I started looking into, well, what did he die of? And it turns out that he died of the same cancer that my father-in-law did. But that it's just like, well, maybe he was having, I asked myself questions. How did he get along with his wife? What's going on there? How's he getting along with his kids? Is he sleeping well? And is he perhaps ill? Is there something going on? And it turns out that it's consistent. And I think I have a sense of what explains his inconsistency, just because of the imagination and asking questions about what could have brought a character like that to be so inconsistent.
That's fascinating. I was watching Jordan Peterson the other day with a friend of mine, and I noticed that about 30 or 40 minutes into the interview, Jordan Peterson became very aggressive, and he wouldn't allow his adversary to really express anything without really attacking him. And I mentioned this to my friend. I said, do you see the change in Jordan Peterson? And she said, yes. And she said, maybe his blood sugar is dipping. And I thought, yeah, that might just be, because that happens to me, where I become very, very moody, So your point is very well taken. It's fascinating. Would most international relations people, would they delve into the personalities of the individuals they're studying?
I don't believe so. When we did this initially, we published this in a response in a journal called International Security. Initially we got a little bit of pushback on that, and then some people are willing to accept our hypothesis on this. And it's not like we know this conclusively. I just think suggest this as a plausible hypothesis that I think we wouldn't have been able to know if we hadn't thought in those terms. So I do think the imagination is helpful it's helpful in theory building, which is part of what I do, and it's also helpful in explaining the past sometimes. So I do think the fiction in that respect has had some impact on my day job too. So I guess that's how I'd answer that question.
Yeah. I mean, this is fascinating, because one can ask the question is, how much of history and the outcome of history be because of low blood sugar? Interesting question.
I mean, I talk to my students about that when we talk about explaining foreign policy, and I talk about imagining a Kellogg's theory of foreign policy. Does what you eat for breakfast have an impact, or did you have enough breakfast? Does that have an impact on how sort of what you're saying about Jordan Peterson, but on how irritable you are and how willing you are to find a way to compromise or shove your position through? And we like to think we can come up with theories of international politics, which we can, which are useful guides to the pressures that decision makers face and that states face. But there's a limit to how much they can explain. So we have to understand that even the best international relations theory is what we call a probabilistic theory. There's still a lot that we can't explain, or there are other aspects that can influence. We could say democracies, say, are less likely to engage in preventive war. But on the other hand, there are circumstances that are not part of that theoretical specification that might make democracy more likely to do so. And so there's a limit to how much we can expect from theories in that regard.
In your book, The Oracle of Spring Garden Road, you basically explain an individual, Gabrielle, and later on Eddie, when he's on the street, his personality, his character, his behavior, of which changes dramatically as he grows up. There's quite a bit of sex in the book. And when he's a younger person, he falls in love with a schoolmate in high school, Jenny. And they have a beautiful romance, and eventually they split because she goes off to UBC and he's here in Toronto at University of Toronto. There's a paragraph that you wrote, which I would like to read aloud. Gabriel understood it and became serious. Oh, that's okay. We don't have to. Sex is a touchy subject for observant Jews. Most avoid sexual relations until they marry. To elevate sex, imbue it with sacred and beautiful purpose. Many refrain even from touching or kissing before marriage. Gabriel himself had planned to abstain from sex until after his wedding, but his actions while under the influence had left him rather confused in this regard. he had been uncertain how Jennifer, who was not Orthodox, would behave, but thought it was likely that she too would eschew sexual relations. So he was perfectly ready to accommodate her wishes as he understood them. I really found it interesting how you got into the mind of a very young person, not only in terms of their academics or their rebellious nature, but their sexuality as well. Where did that come from? Like, how would one do research on that?
I didn't. It's more a question of, I spend my time around students, so I live with students. And beyond that, just one imagines the types of conversations and conflicts that these two characters were likely to come into. And so, given that sex is a part of life, it was something that they'd have to navigate. What would they do given their priors, given their personalities? And so I imagine that they might have that Gabriel might have gone through that kind of calculation himself. Where do I stand? What do I do? Especially someone like Gabriel, who was immensely reflective and spent a lot of time thinking about the way he ought to behave and what he ought to do and why. And so I imagine that would be the kind of calculation that he would go through.
And the sexuality, remind me, please. Did he have sex on the street? I don't think so.
No, he didn't.
I think at some point in the book you said it had been he actually brushed by a woman, and it had been many years since he had been touched. That's what you wrote. Yeah, is there a reason why you did not make him sexual in the street?
I don't think he could have, given what he was running away from, and given the fact that he had written off human beings. I think he needed that cocoon of safety to protect him from human beings. And it's really only, Jane who started breaking through, not in a sexual way, but started breaking through that cocoon. He was someone, she was his exception. The one human being who was intelligent enough and kind enough and worthy enough to actually, at least let her inside his shell. But no, it would have been inconsistent with his whole rejection of humanity, I think.
He was an obstreperous character, wasn't he?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. What made him that way? Was his upbringing was coming from a religious Jewish world? What do you think?
No, I don't think so. Most in the religious Jewish world are not. I don't think that's it. I think what it was for him was his high standards on one hand, maybe his double standard on another hand, but his high standard, he had his ideals about the way people ought to behave. And when people fell short of his ideals, regardless of whether they were their ideals or not, like he and his parents had very different attitudes towards Judaism, for example. And his parents didn't meet his ideals. And that was unacceptable. Whenever anyone fell shy of his ideals, whoever it was, whether it's his friends, his rabbi, whoever it was, he was just willing to cut them off and cut away from them. And I think there was that problem of being unable to forgive people for being human. I think that really is, if there's a key takeaway to his personality, it's his inability to forgive people for being human. And while at the same time not necessarily holding himself to the same standards and being pretty easy to ignore his own humanity.
Do you think his inability to forgive and to be a little looser in terms of standards that he put out into the world, do you think that led to his homelessness?
Oh, absolutely.
How?
I think that's what drove him onto the streets ultimately. The fact that he wanted to reject everything and everybody.
And therefore, he couldn't pursue his academia. He couldn't pursue a lofty level of work, right?
He couldn't. He did not want to interact in a world of human beings, and he found his way to escape it. I mean, even as a child, there was this issue. He had this pursuit of perfection, whatever perfection meant.
Yeah.
And so when he played violin, his violin teacher, Ludmilla, at one point was very satisfied with his work. He was just a really gifted young violinist. But he was always frustrated with his violin playing because it was never perfect. It wasn't, as he said, music as God intended. And he found that really frustrating. And, she told him, you can't expect perfection when human beings are involved. And she meant it one way, like, settle for something less than perfect, settle for something wonderful that's less than perfect. And he understood that, and that was a very, very important statement for him. But he understood that as, oh, if you want perfection, get rid of human beings, like avoid human beings. And I think that's his problem, this quest for perfection, which is impossible when human beings are there. And I think that's the point. But he missed that point.
He had a teacher in high school who really helped him pull things around. He decided at some point, Gabriel did, after hanging around with the stoners for a long time and getting wasted very often and his marks dropping, despite the fact that he was brilliant, he decided, okay, enough is enough. There's a very interesting piece in your book about what caused that change. But he had a teacher who helped him, who believed in him, who gave him the opportunity. And he thought back about him. The way you wrote the book is forward, backwards, forward, backwards. And that's always a compelling way of reading a novel. But at some point in the book, you said that he felt as though he must have been a major disappointment to his teacher as well, along with his parents, along with Jennifer and other people, or Jenny, whom he had known. Was Gabriel, in fact, a major disappointment?
I would believe he had to be. I mean, I don't want to give too much away about the ending and how people judged him at the end and what his purpose is. But there's one of the themes that runs through the book is there's a section in chapter 3 where he's remembering from Hebrew school. He's remembering, a rabbi talking to him about a person's tafkid, his purpose in life.
Yeah.
And that bothers him. He's exercised by that in various different forms. And when he's thinking about what Mr. Stewart did for him in high school, he's thinking about the same thing, like, my purpose, what have I done? And, Mr. Stewart, in a moving, very moving piece, I think, says, I had imagined that I would do great things in life, and I haven't. That ship sailed. And he says, but if I have made a difference in your life, and he made a huge difference in Gabriel's life at the time, and really saved him from the brink. And he says, if I've made a difference, then you go on to do great things, and I'll be implicated in that. I will share in your success if you go ahead and do great things. And as a teacher, as a professor and teacher, I can really appreciate that too, and that sentiment and what Mr. Stewart might have been feeling in that regard. I always really enjoy and celebrate my students' successes. But he was a great disappointment. He had such tremendous potential, and did he achieve his purpose? And so I think various characters in the story reach judgments about that in the end, in the epilogue. But there's certainly a great sense of disappointment throughout his life. I think a lot of people expected so much more of Gabriel.
Well, what about the adage, and you find this within Jewish thought as well, that it's not up to us to judge a person's successes or otherwise, that's up to God, right? Who's to say that Gabriel didn't make a huge difference on the street to even one person or to two people, and that in fact was his tafkid here in the world?
I don't want to address that directly, because in a sense that's where the novel goes the end. So it would, I don't want to say too much about that, but I think the readers may certainly pick up on that as we get to the end of the novel.
You in chapter 7, you do a very interesting literary thing. Essentially, you write a court case, and it's a very titillating court case of what Gabriel had witnessed one day when he had come to shul, synagogue, seeing the president and one of the administrative assistants, Mrs. Naomi Weiss, what seemed like they were copulating, right? And you go through a number of pages on how this trial would play out. It really stands on its own, right? If one doesn't take a literary leap, they could ask themselves, well, where did this come? Like they say in Yiddish, from Vienna. What is this all about? What brought you to write this piece, this chapter, in such a way?
In the present chapters, I have past and present chapters, which are written in different styles in a sense. They have different missions. But the challenge in the present chapter was getting inside Gabriel's mind and life on the street. And I needed first to get inside myself, but then I needed to bring the readers inside his mind. And this is the mind of a person who spends most of his time on his own, who doesn't have much respect for other people that he encounters. And so therefore, even though he does talk to people, he does dispense his wisdom, he's alone in his head for almost, for 23 or 22 or 24 hours a day, and lives inside his own mind. And so I have the different ways I think that I show how he lives inside his mind with a lot of the dialogues he has with himself. But this was a means of showing how he obsesses with the past, relives the past, and reconstructs the past. How each time he retells the past, it's a little different, and there are little troubling threads that bother him. So the court case doesn't work out exactly as he had planned either, because in his mind he's always right and everyone else is always wrong. But he's got those nagging doubts that come out in the prosecutor has throws out some curveballs for his conscience, I think, in the court case. And so I thought this was a really great tool of showing first the surreality of his existence, but also, what it might be like to live inside his own mind, besides saying that he relived his past and relived, tried people in the court of his own mind. I thought it was useful to actually delve into the mind and see what that might be like.
So when you're sitting at your desk over your laptop and this idea comes to you, or had come to you in the past week or month or what have you, do you question that for a moment? You go, hey, this maybe not fit in literarily as I'd like to, and hold back, reticent from going ahead on it, or boom, do you dive right in?
I had the idea for this, and it was like one of those ideas. I can remember when this was. I was trying to sleep on a Saturday night, and I just had this idea of, well, maybe there could be a court case. And I started to think about, well, what would it be like? What would it look like? Who would be called? What would be the witnesses? And by about, sometime like 3 or 4 in the morning, I had a good idea. I actually I keep a writer's notebook nearby so that I can actually get myself back to sleep again. Because if not, I'm afraid I'm going to lose the idea. So I kind of sketched
with a
that.
Pen? You have a pen there?
With a pen, exactly. So, I went to the washroom, sketched that out very briefly. And finally, when I was comfortable that I wouldn't lose it, I went back to sleep. And the following morning, as soon as I got up, I went to my computer and started saying, okay, I think there's something here. There may be something here. Let's see what it would look like. Let's sketch it out. And I spent most of the day doing that and just writing it out. And I wasn't sure whether it was going to go into the final version or not. But then I liked it. I liked how it kind of connected to what was happening in that chapter, or supposed to be happening in that chapter. And I thought, it reminded me sort of like, authors will occasionally do that. But after I had written it up, it kind of reminded me of a little bit of the background sketches in Norman Mailer's The Naked and the Dead, where, you have the narrative and then you have this, background sketch of a character coming in, and then you have narrative, background sketch. So I kind of thought, yeah, it could work like that worked. I tested that out on my wife, and she thought, only when the whole thing was done. I asked her, is that a keeper or is that not? And she said, no, that's a keeper.
She liked it.
Yeah, and a number of people who've read it told me that was their favorite part of the book. Actually.
Oh, was it? It was in italics. I felt as though it was almost like a dream sequence.
That's what it was intended to be. It was definitely internal. It was definitely internal to his mind, imagination. Yeah.
Did you have an editor?
You're looking at him.
So nobody outside of you?
My wife read things. We always read each other's work and comment on it. And she found some typos. And In early drafts that I gave, some people found typos, but no, I edit my own work for everything, for political science as well, for international relations. I edit my own work, and try to be as careful as possible about finding things.
Will Natalie, will Natalie, your wife, tell you, Norrin, this is just not great?
Oh, she will. She does that. She will do that. The wonderful thing about this book, you see, normally we go at each other with spiked baseball bats, and this is because we care about each other. We know that if you present something to a professional audience that is not ready for prime time, you get bloodied, and it's very embarrassing. Yes, so we decide that it's far better if we try to rip each other's work apart right off the bat. So that, our metaphor is that a friend comes at another friend with a spiked baseball bat, so that you can correct everything and you're bulletproof when you present that professionally. And that's what happened. That's what happened with the short stories. I mean, she had read my professional work before, but for the short stories, she read them. She liked them. She had some she liked more than others. She had always has some comments, some suggestions. What was really bizarre for me, and frankly, it moved me very much as well, is that she finished. It's a long book to read, but she finished reading The Oracle of Spring Garden Road, the first draft of that. She finished reading that. She came to the synagogue, after reading it, and she told me right after the services, she had tears in her eyes, and she said, "It's perfect. Don't change a word."
Really?
Yes, and that was something that was, I'm not normally speechless. By profession and personality, I talk, and I was speechless. I just was overwhelmed by that.
That's a lovely piece. How easily crushed are you when it comes to your writing?
Not very. I've been doing this a long time, and I tend not to get crushed. If I get, my wife can point out things that I'm really doing badly in something that I'm writing, and often she's right. I won't say all the time, but often she's right. Here, with the fiction, it's funny because we've disagreed a lot. Where I'll say, no, actually, I think I want to keep that. I know it doesn't connect with you, but I think I want to keep that. And not with the Oracle of Spring Garden Road, but and in general, I was told that listen to people's advice about what doesn't work for them, but never take their advice about how you should fix it, because that's got to come organically. And I think that's good advice. No, I tend not to get crushed. I'm used to doing this professionally.
So if you're speaking to 150 people in a room and everybody seems pretty riveted to your every word, but there's some guy in the back who's nodding off, you don't focus on that one guy?
No,
I do.
I lecture, and sometimes I have students will fall asleep. I mean, they haven't had much sleep the night before. This is more of a phenomenon in the United States. In Canada, I never had that problem. I'm not typically a boring lecturer. It's not what I do, and the stuff that I'm teaching is interesting. But in the U.S., I've been getting more people falling asleep, and I think it's because students are very tired here and stretched to the limit, and they're all playing on the volleyball team, and they're all captain of the debate team, and they're all pledging for fraternities. And I've had particularly fraternity pledges who didn't sleep for previous nights, and they fall asleep. And I usually talk to them after if they don't think it's useful for them. But no, it doesn't throw me off while I'm.
Does it piss you off? Does it piss you off?
I feel, particularly in the United States, it annoys me because I think of their parents, especially as I'm paying for college tuition now for my elder daughter. I think of how much they're paying for this class, and if they're falling asleep, I think they're not being fair to their parents. Okay. So I usually will tell them something like that. I'm pretty gentle. I don't try to call them on. I don't try and humiliate them. There's one or two times where I may have come down a little bit too hard on someone afterwards, not in class, but like after class. And one or two times I've had a student who's told me that, well, you could have done that more gently, and I think that was fair. But it was fair that I could have done that. But always adjusting and learning. But I tend more to get pissed off for them, not for me. I don't care that much. I'm a professional. I tell them they can walk in and out of my class if they need, as long as they don't disturb other people. They can go and make phone calls during class as long as it's not in my class and they don't pull out the screen to distract other people. That's fine. But I'm more concerned about how much they're paying and how much they'll regret having wasted their time later on.
You're an interesting fellow because you're absolutely fine with being critiqued. And that's a very beautiful character trait. I read a number of responses to your book, and I want to read one of them to you with a preface that when you write a book, as you have done, a novel, it's 400 pages, and X amount of people read that book, you can never quite be sure what they're taking out of it, right? It's very local to the reader. So let me read you this one piece. This is what this woman wrote about your book. More women or men read your book? What do you think?
I don't know.
You don't know. Rife with beautiful imagery, The Oracle of Spring Garden was a book that made me, listen to this, want to hug my family close and revisit all the priorities I ever based my life around. What a gift to eschew the keeping with the Joneses type of thinking and instead focus only on minimalist lifestyle. Eddie's gift as a character was his presence itself. He's quirky, fiercely intelligent, and loyal. I loved his backstory and the way Norrin developed his character through flashback chapters. I was endlessly fascinated by the characters who could see Eddie's acerbic caricature and into his true intentions. Finally, Eddie's presence in this story makes the storyline fun to follow and intriguing to dive into. I love the story development as well, rife with rich setting, descriptions, and a beautiful take on life itself. When I read this to you, Mr. Novelist, Mr. Author, Mr. Writer, how does it feel?
It feels great to have someone understand what you're doing. It feels great. I mean, I'll tell you one thing. My wife and I had discussions about what I want, what I'm doing, why I'm doing this. And I explained to her that, actually pointed to that painting and back, as but I love what an artist can do. A painter can set a mood and convey that to other people, can convey emotions, can make you feel something that the author, that the artist is feeling. And I have no talent in painting. I am not an artist at all when it comes to drawing, painting. It's not what I do. It's not what I'm skilled at. And I've always felt bad about that. I felt there was something that I'm missing. I feel that when I write, I can do that. And I can create a character and a scene and a setting and an emotion. And I like to think that I can reach other people and make them feel, whether it's exaltation at times or whether it's melancholy, whether it's regret. And when I hear you read that, I think I've done it. I've been able to make another human being feel what I feel when I was writing that. And that's wonderful. That's just beautiful. To me, that's my painting.
You know, it's very true what she wrote, the idea of wanting to go home and hug your kids. I feel that way too. I have an 18-year-old son, and he is about to enter University of Toronto, which is really Indigenous, which is really something which is hugely part of your life. You had a great time at U of T, and Gabriel's life. And I am both extraordinarily excited about my son starting U of T. The idea, and you wrote this, and when you wrote it, I took a picture of it and I sent it to my son. It was the idea, I sent him a few pages, by the way, the idea that, oh, finally I'm out of high school where everything is rote, where you have to take these specific subjects and your teachers are, okay, some are great, but most are fair at best. Now you're in university and you're sitting in the cafeteria talking about Hobbes or talking about Nietzsche. You're discussing ideas. And I thought, yeah, that's really correct. And that's where I want my son to go. And thinking about where Gabriel could have gone and did not, it broke my heart. It broke my heart. You know, that's such a tragedy.
Yeah. No, the university experience is just a wonderful experience. And I know I benefited so much. I felt like my mind was unchained and freed as an undergraduate, and had that ability to explore whatever I wanted to explore in a world where students formed student government. A good friend of mine was from the neighborhood, actually, from Bathurst and Shepherd area, was the president of the Student Administrative Council one year that I was there. in general, their student organizations, governments, sports, newspapers, and all these debating teams, all these opportunities to participate that you didn't have when you were a high school student. And so it's just a wonderful experience. And I see that. That's why I feel sometimes I'm eager that stress doesn't get in the way of my students' lives as well, because I want them to enjoy all that there is to enjoy, while at the same time recognizing that everything counts and that they have to keep themselves on track for, to graduate and get a job afterwards or to go on to graduate school. But it is a tremendous experience and absolutely love it. But at the same time, I know many people not quite like Gabriel. Gabriel, as I say, is a product of my imagination, and I don't know anyone like him. But I know many students over the years who have fallen by the waysides in different ways. Every year, I often teach a freshman seminar at Lehigh, where part of the mission is not only to teach the material, but also to teach them how to get by and how to develop good study habits and how to survive 4 years and not fall off the wagon. And I try and keep in touch with my students. I tell them to keep on popping by, telling me how things are going, and if there are any advice I can give them over the years, please continue coming to me. And invariably, every year I get 1, 2, or sometimes even 3 students who did really well in my freshman seminar who will write to me asking me for a letter to try to help get their fellowship reinstated, because they, there's, I think of one letter in particular, but they're all sort of like this. But one student in particular said, I should have listened to you. You told me not to fall by the wayside. You told me to plan. You told me that, that whatever I did, making certain that my academics were kept up is crucial. Not to forego life, but at the same time make sure my academics are kept up. And it's just, it's tragic for me when I see most of them. I always write the letter and I always try to support them, but most of the time they don't get their fellowship reinstated. And it's tragic because they've lost out on what could have been. Mm-hmm. And Gabriel's a special case of that. It's a very different scenario. He didn't have that problem, but it's a shame when you're on a track for great success and to be able to enjoy your life, and because of choices that you've made, often bad choices you've made, you aren't able to.
Do you see yourself as a man who's generous of spirit?
I'd like to. I don't know whether others would see me as that. I think my wife and kids would. I think many of my students would, I hope. Yeah. But I may be projecting, my inflated self-image on others, and really not for me to answer that question.
Yeah, from at face value, at first blush, my sense is that you are, and it sounds like your students are lucky to have you. So, artificial intelligence. I asked ChatGPT to write a poem about homelessness, and you want to hear what it wrote?
Sure.
And then I'd love to hear what you have to say about AI. Beneath the city's iron gaze, where shadows stretch in neon haze, a silent world drifts through the night, invisible beneath the light. Their homes are dreams, both frail and thin, built from echoes of where they've been, cardboards of kingdoms, blankets worn, shelters found where hearts are torn. They walk the streets with stories deep of lives that fade and fortune keep. Each face a map of trials faced, of battles fought, and hopes misplaced. In alleyways and doorways cold, their spirits shine, though often sold to weariness and silent cries. They still possess the brightest eyes. Through every dawn that breaks anew, they search the skies of clearer blue for kindness in the passerby, for warmth that does not just pass by. Yet in their struggle, there's a grace, a testament to the human race. For every heart that's bruised and scared or scarred shows a strength that's not marred. Let us remember in our plight the ones who sleep beneath the night. For every soul beneath the stars is deserving of a world less scarred. Your thoughts?
Well, right off the bat, I'd say I like the poem. I think it's expressive of what homeless people's experience is. I'm not a fan of ChatGPT or AI. I think it strips away our humanity. I think why that poem works is because the nature of the algorithm is it's scouring people human beings who've actually written things about homeless people, um, with real feelings and real thoughts, and it's cribbing them and putting them together and benefiting from mimicking human emotions, insights, and observations. But it's not creative, it's not genuine, and it is a soulless endeavor. So I'm not a fan of AI. I've got to be very careful because my wife is an AI professor, but she largely agrees with me on this anyway, so we're on the same page. But uh, I feel sometimes that we're delegating the core aspects of humanity, creativity, the ability to express ideas and emotions to machines, and that makes us poorer. So aside from all the, copyright issues, legal issues, intellectual property issues, I just don't think it's useful for human beings to offload our ability to express our core humanity to soulless machines.
And where do you think you are in the fight with expressing that attitude? Do you think you're inevitably going to lose on this one?
I don't know. Certainly right now there are limits to chatbots. There are limits to ChatGPT, to generative AI. So like we can see in our field, if you give them prompts to write essays, they tend to write the same essay over and over again, like with minor differences. They tend to use the same source material. It's not great from the point of view of generating new material. However, it may get better over time. It still is an empty machine in the end that can't innovate based on joy or pain, can't express genuine joy or genuine pain. It can only mimic or parrot someone else's. And therefore, there's a limit to the creativity, because any creativity is simply an algorithmic creativity that is almost random, rather than expressing real thoughts, real emotions to other human beings. So I hope that we won't replace painters with machines, that we won't replace poets with machines, that we won't replace authors with machines, because I think it would limit our human experience and make us considerably poorer.
I think it would limit our reasons to live.
Yeah.
The classic story of the father sends his two little daughters to the marketplace in the middle of a famine. And he says, here's a coin to buy some bread, and here's a coin to buy the rose. And they dutifully go, and they come back. They say, Papa, we understand the bread. We're hungry. What's the rose for? He says, the bread is to sustain us. The rose is to give us a reason to be sustained. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the problem with artificial intelligence, right?
There is no rose, exactly.
Yeah, there's no rose, right?
Exactly. I think of that story in John Irving's Life According to Garp. Of the he writes a story. The character Garp writes a story about this person who wears these gloves to protect him. Because without those gloves he wouldn't survive, he wouldn't live, and he hates his life because it's artificial, because he can't make connections to anyone else out there. And so suddenly, in a fit of angst, he rips off the gloves, and with tears in his eyes, he touches everything and touches people and really feels the grass and the flowers. And of course he dies. He's going to die at the end, but it's absolutely worth it because he actually lived for a day, basically. And I think that's the point of your story as well. The idea is we're human beings. We're meant to connect to other human beings. And I think we take that away when we don't connect to human beings, when we offload that to machines.
I am going to put, excuse me, under us the place to buy your books. And as this is a recorded show, people can pick up on that when they watch the show. There are actually 2 links there. The book is available at Amazon. I think it's reflected in that. And am I correct at major bookstores?
No, but the Israeli Source in Toronto and
Right,
Doncaster has the novel as well. You know, it's a work in progress to get it available in other sources. If there are bookstores that people who would like to carry the book who are watching the show, please get in touch with me. But right now, the primary avenue is Amazon, and then some local bookstores. I have a bookstore, the Narberth bookstore in Philadelphia is carrying that as well, and we're working on more at the time.
It must be a real trip to walk in the bookstore and see your book, eh?
I mean, I'll be honest with you. I've published 9 books before, 9 academic books, and it's nice to see my books in the bookstore. The fiction books have given me some special joy that the other ones couldn't, because there's something. It's more artistic, basically. Yeah.
And do you know at the top of every single of those 400 pages is your name?
I didn't know if it was at the top of every page or every second page. Okay.
No, you're right. It's every second page. Where's that from, Norrin? Where's your name from?
I'll tell you. I can tell you 3 stories, and you can pick which one you prefer.
It's very biblical of you. Yeah.
Or Talmudic. First story is I was born in the late 1960s, and in fact, the same year that the Marvel Comics Fantastic Four came out with a character called the Silver Surfer, whose alternative identity, his alter ego, was Norrin Rad, Norrin. And so you might conclude that maybe my parents read comics, except the problem with that is that he came out 6 months after I came out, which means that the causal arrow would have to work in the other direction, which is also probably kind of unlikely. But that's one possible story. Second story, my parents were. I was born in the 1960s, and so perhaps my parents were doing what other people were doing in the 1960s. And maybe that's what gave them the creativity to come up with such an unusual name. But the only thing is, I don't think my parents were druggies at all. I don't think my parents ever smoked anything that that they wouldn't have wanted me to smoke. So I'm guessing that's probably not it either. The story they tell me is that they gave me the Hebrew name Natan, and they knew that if they had called me Nathan in English, I would never talk to them again. And they're probably right about that. I got to be careful about that. My provost is named Nathan. So they decided, they found the Hebrew name Oren, and they added an N and changed the spelling. And that sounds like it's probably true.
Are there many Ripsmans out there?
No.
There aren't, are there?
They're not. They're very few.
Where are you guys from? Where are you from?
We are from Bessarabia, the name Ripsman, Bessarabia, from what's now Kishinev. My great grandfather was killed in one of the Kishinev pogroms, and his family walked to his wife and 3 children. My grandfather was 1 at the time. Walked to Northern Europe and gave the remaining money to a ship's captain, who ended up was supposed to take them to New York, but threw them off in rural Quebec, and that's how my family ended up in Montreal eventually.
Wow, our story's unbelievable.
So my grandfather didn't have any information about the origins of the name at that point, because he was a year old at the time, and his sisters were like only a few years old at the time, so they didn't know the origins of the name. I was on the Ripsman farm in Mugshimim, I believe, in Israel at one point. And there's another Ripsman that was there that we connected to. And they were hoping they could get the origins of the name as well. They were also from Bessarabia, but their father was injured in a shell explosion near his helmet, which destroyed his memory in the first Arab-Israeli War, 1947 to 49. And as a result, he had no memory of the past as well. And so we were both looking to each other, and neither of us had any information on the origins of the name.
My God, our existence is amazing.
Unlikely, right? Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Ladies and gentlemen, the show is called the Avrum Rosensweig Show, and it is sponsored by the Professional Center, Toronto's leading co-working space where excellence is the norm. From private sunlit offices to fully equipped meeting rooms, their spaces are designed to allow you to focus and get to work. At TPC, they combine high-end amenities with unparalleled service, ensuring your office experience meets the highest standards. Discover why TPC offers more sophistication, more privacy, and more opportunities to grow. For more information, visit theprofessionalcenter.com. And if you mention my name, AVRUM, you'll get 10% off private offices and meeting rooms, which is pretty cool. My guest today has been what I can honestly say is a dear friend now. And his name is Norrin Ripsman, who's a professor of international studies and a novelist. He's an author. I really enjoyed our time together. I really did. Thank you.
So did I. Thank you very much. This was a lovely conversation, following up our previous lovely conversation. So let's keep doing this.
Yes, we've had a couple, haven't we? I really ask people that to listen to these interviews very closely and try to take something out of it that works for you in terms of the development of your own spirit, in terms of the development of your life. So many of my guests, I'd hazard to say all of them actually, are individuals who have worked really, really hard to make their lives meaningful and purposeful. And that's why I bring on the particular guests that I do, because I think that we all have something to learn from them. And I think what you can take away from my interview today with Norrin is it's very good to be eclectic in nature. In other words, there are some people who are just professors and they stay in that corner. I think what we learned from Norrin is that we have many, many different talents and many, many different skills. Like Einstein was a violinist, a very good violinist. Da Vinci was an Olympian, not just a painter. Draw upon your soul and look at it in its entirety and see what areas of life that you could pursue. And if it's not one area, then pursue two. If it's not two, then pursue three. And I also think the thing is you can take away for this interview is that, Norrin, I hope you're okay with this. I hope you're comfortable with this, but I find you to be a very kind man. I really do, in terms of how you deal with your family, in terms of how you deal with your students. And, to me, kindness is what the world, the fuel that makes our world go around. So once again, thank you so much for being with me. I really appreciate it a lot.
Thank you very much, Avrum.
Ladies and gentlemen, we look forward to being with you again. We will next week with some fascinating guests. I mentioned to you, Brian Prowski will be on, an author of 8 books, which is pretty damn impressive. I don't know how he does it, but I assure you it's going to be a wonderful interview. God bless. There should be peace in Israel and peace in the world. Pursue your passion. Pursue that thing inside of you. That's great. We all have it. And